If I could sit down with my 25-year-old self, crying in her bathroom after another fight with a boyfriend who made her feel small, I would tell her something that would have changed everything. The love you're fighting for isn't love. It's a pattern. And if you don't learn to recognize the difference now, you'll spend the next 15 years repeating it. I'm 42 now, and this is everything I wish I'd known about love before I learned it the hard way. When I was 23 years old, I met a man named Brandon at a friend's party. He was charming, confident, the kind of person who commanded attention when he walked into a room. We started dating within weeks, and I was convinced I'd found what everyone told me to look for: passion, intensity, that all-consuming feeling that made everything else fade into the background. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags I mistook for romance. The way he'd get jealous when I talked to other men, which I interpreted as proof of how much he cared. The way our fights were explosive and dramatic, which I thought meant we had real passion. The way he'd criticize my clothes, my friends, my choices, always framed as concern or helpful advice. The way I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells, trying not to upset him, which I believed was just the natural compromise of a serious relationship. I stayed with Brandon for 3 years. 3 years of highs and lows, of breaking up and getting back together, of believing that if I just loved him enough, tried hard enough, changed enough about myself, we'd finally find the happiness I saw in movies and read about in books. My friends started expressing concern. "He doesn't treat you well," my best friend Jennifer told me one night after witnessing another public argument. "You're not yourself anymore around him." But I dismissed her. She didn't understand, I told myself. She'd never felt passion like this. She didn't know that real love was supposed to be hard, that you were supposed to fight for it, that anything worthwhile required sacrifice. Those beliefs, that love should be hard, that jealousy means caring, that losing yourself is part of partnership, they weren't things I'd made up. They were messages I'd absorbed from everywhere. From romantic comedies, where the guy's persistence eventually wears down the woman's resistance. From love songs that romanticized possessiveness and obsession. From the cultural narrative that told me my value was tied to being in a relationship, that being single meant being unlovable, that I should be grateful someone wanted me. If I could go back to that 23-year-old version of myself, the first thing I would tell her is this: everything you think you know about love is wrong. Not because you're stupid or naive, but because you've been taught to romanticize dysfunction and call it passion. I would tell her that jealousy isn't love. It's insecurity and control. That explosive fights aren't evidence of caring deeply. They're signs of poor communication and unresolved trauma. That compromise doesn't mean changing who you are to fit someone else's vision of who you should be. It means two whole people finding ways to accommodate each other's needs while remaining themselves. I would tell her that the butterflies in her stomach aren't always excitement. Sometimes they're anxiety. That the feeling of walking on eggshells isn't the thrilling unpredictability of passion. It's the exhausting reality of emotional manipulation. That the dramatic makeup sessions after fights aren't proof of an unbreakable bond. They're a trauma bond that's keeping her trapped in a cycle. But at 23, I didn't know any of this. So I stayed. I made excuses. I believed that if I just loved him enough, everything would work out. And I wasted 3 years of my life learning that you can't love someone into being the person you need them to be. Brandon and I finally broke up for good when I was 26. It was messy and painful, and I spent months convinced I'd never find anyone else, that I'd lost the love of my life, that I was making the biggest mistake of my existence. Looking back, ending that relationship was the best thing I ever did. But at the time, it felt like failure. I spent about a year single, which was good in theory but wasted in practice. Instead of using that time to understand why I'd stayed in a toxic relationship for so long, to examine my own patterns and beliefs about love, to work on myself, I just waited. Waited to feel whole again. Waited for the next relationship to fix the brokenness I felt. Waited for someone else to define my worth. At 27, I met David. He was different from Brandon, gentler, more stable, less explosive. I thought I'd learned my lesson. I thought I'd chosen better this time. And in some ways, I had. David wasn't jealous or controlling. He didn't criticize me or start dramatic fights. On the surface, the relationship looked healthy. But there was a different problem. I had no idea who I was outside of a relationship. I'd gone from my parents' house to living with a college roommate to Brandon to briefly alone to David. I'd never actually spent time figuring out what I wanted, what I valued, who I was when I wasn't performing for someone else. With David, I molded myself into what I thought he wanted. He liked hiking, so I became a hiker even though I'd never particularly enjoyed it. He was introverted and preferred quiet nights at home, so I stopped seeing my friends as much. He thought my career ambitions were stressful and encouraged me to find a more balanced job, so I downgraded my professional goals. I told myself this was compromise. This was what mature relationships looked like: peaceful, stable, accommodating. But the truth I couldn't see at the time was that I was still doing what I'd done with Brandon, just in a different way. I was still erasing myself, still believing that love meant sacrificing my own needs, still assuming that my role in a relationship was to adapt and please rather than to show up as my full self and be met as an equal. The difference was that with Brandon, the toxicity was obvious. With David, it was subtle. With Brandon, I was losing myself to someone else's demands. With David, I was losing myself to my own belief that being in a relationship required me to shrink. We dated for 4 years, and they were fine years, comfortable, safe. But looking back, I realize I was sleepwalking through them. I wasn't unhappy exactly, but I wasn't truly happy either. I was just existing in a relationship, assuming that was what adult life looked like. If I could go back to that version of myself at 28, 29, 30 years old, I would tell her, comfortable isn't the same as right. Safe isn't the same as fulfilling. Being in a relationship doesn't mean you've figured out love. Sometimes it just means you're too afraid to be alone. I would tell her that you can't have a healthy relationship with someone else when you don't have a healthy relationship with yourself. That molding yourself to fit someone else's life isn't compromise, it's self-abandonment. That a good partner doesn't need you to be less than you are, they want you to be more. I would tell her that the questions she should be asking aren't, is he nice to me? And does this feel stable? But do I like who I am in this relationship? And am I growing or shrinking? And would I want my future daughter to accept a relationship like this? But at 30, I still didn't know to ask those questions. So I stayed in a relationship that was fine but not right, with a person who was good but not right for me, for 4 more years. The relationship with David ended when I was 31, not because either of us did anything dramatically wrong, but because we'd both started to realize we were in it out of inertia rather than genuine desire to be together. The breakup was sad but amicable. We both cried. We both said we cared about each other. And then we both moved on, probably more easily than either of us expected. But for me, that breakup was a turning point. Because for the first time in my adult life, I was truly alone, not waiting for the next relationship, not rebounding, not looking, just alone. And it terrified me. At 31 years old, I'd never lived by myself. I'd never traveled alone. I'd never made major life decisions without considering a partner. I'd never sat with my own thoughts long enough to figure out what I actually wanted versus what I thought I was supposed to want. I remember sitting in my apartment, my first solo apartment, about 2 months after the breakup, and feeling this overwhelming panic. Who was I? What did I even like? What did I want from life? I genuinely didn't know. I'd spent so many years defining myself through relationships and adapting to other people's preferences that I'd never developed a strong sense of self. That realization was devastating, and it was necessary. I started therapy around this time with a therapist named Dr. Sarah Mitchell. In our first session, she asked me what brought me in, and I said, I keep choosing the wrong relationships. She paused, then asked, what makes you think you're choosing them? What do you mean? Of course I'm choosing them. Maybe, she said. Or maybe you're just accepting whoever chooses you because you don't believe you deserve to be selective. That question hit me like a physical blow. Because she was right. I'd never actually chosen my relationships based on whether the person was right for me. I'd chosen based on whether they wanted me, and then I'd worked backward to convince myself we were compatible. Over the next year of therapy, I started to unpack all the beliefs I held about love and where they came from. Many traced back to my childhood, to watching my mother martyr herself in her marriage, always accommodating my father, always putting her own needs last. She taught me, not through words but through example, that being a good partner meant sacrificing yourself. Other beliefs came from the culture around me. The movies, books, and songs that told me I was incomplete without romantic love, that my happy ending depended on finding the right person, that being single meant being somehow deficient. Dr. Mitchell helped me see that I'd been approaching love from a place of scarcity and fear rather than abundance and confidence. I believed that relationships were hard to find, so I should hold on to whoever wanted me. I believed my worth came from being chosen, so I did whatever it took to be chosen. I believed that being single meant being unlovable, so I avoided it at all costs. What would it look like? Dr. Mitchell asked me one session, if you believed you were inherently valuable regardless of your relationship status. What would you choose differently? I started crying because I genuinely didn't know. I'd never believed that. I'd never acted from that place. But I wanted to. For the first time, I wanted to learn. Between ages 31 and 35, I did something I'd never done before. I dated myself. That sounds cheesy, and at first it felt ridiculous. But it's the only way I can describe what I did. I treated myself the way I'd always treated boyfriends, with attention, care, curiosity, investment. I took myself on dates, to movies I wanted to see, to restaurants I'd always been curious about, to museums and concerts and weekend trips. I did things alone not because I couldn't find someone to go with me, but because I wanted to learn to enjoy my own company. I started asking myself questions I'd never bothered to ask. What do I actually like? Not what did I pretend to like because a boyfriend liked it, but what genuinely brings me joy? What are my values? What are my deal breakers? What kind of life do I want to build? I took up hobbies that were entirely mine. I started painting, which I'd loved as a kid but had abandoned somewhere along the way. I joined a book club. I learned to garden. I traveled alone to places I'd always wanted to visit. I also started setting boundaries with family and friends, practicing saying no when I didn't want to do something instead of automatically agreeing to keep the peace. It was uncomfortable at first. I felt guilty. I worried people would think I was selfish. But gradually, I started to feel something I'd never felt before, a sense of self that existed independently of other people's approval. During this time, I went on a few dates here and there, but nothing serious. And for the first time, I was okay with that. I wasn't desperately searching for a relationship to complete me. I was content building a life that felt full on its own. At 33, I went on a date with a man named Marcus who seemed great on paper, successful, attractive, charming. But about 30 minutes into dinner, I realized something was off. He was talking almost exclusively about himself, barely asking me questions, interrupting me when I did speak. Nothing terrible, nothing overtly wrong, just not right. The old me would have given him another chance, would have convinced myself I was being too picky, would have worried that rejecting him meant I'd end up alone forever. The new me politely finished dinner, thanked him for his time, and never saw him again. It felt powerful, not because I'd rejected someone, but because I'd trusted my own judgment. I'd prioritized my own comfort and preferences over the fear of being single. I'd chosen myself. If I could go back to my 25-year-old self, I would tell her, you have to learn to love yourself before you can truly love someone else. Not in a cheesy, self-help book way, but in a practical, lived experience way. You have to know who you are, what you want, what you value. You have to build a life that feels full and meaningful on its own. Because if you don't, you'll keep entering relationships from a place of neediness, looking for someone else to give you the things you should be giving yourself. Validation, purpose, identity, worth. I would tell her that being single isn't a failure or a holding pattern while you wait for your real life to start. It's an opportunity to become the kind of person you'd want to be in a relationship with. It's a chance to develop self-knowledge, self-respect, self-sufficiency. I would tell her that the relationship with yourself sets the template for all your other relationships. If you don't respect yourself, you'll accept partners who don't respect you. If you don't know yourself, you'll mold yourself to whoever you're with. If you don't value yourself, you'll settle for whoever values you, regardless of whether they're right for you. This isn't about becoming perfect or having it all figured out before you date. It's about building a foundation. It's about knowing yourself well enough to recognize when someone is a good match and when they're not. It's about being whole enough on your own that a relationship becomes something you choose rather than something you need. When I met James, I was 36 years old. I'd been doing the work on myself for several years. I had a life I genuinely loved, good friends, a career I was proud of, hobbies that brought me joy, a sense of self I'd never had before. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I wasn't avoiding one either. I was just living. We met at a community garden where I'd started volunteering. He was funny, kind, easy to talk to. We became friends first, which was also new for me. All my previous relationships had started with immediate romantic intensity. When we eventually started dating, everything felt different. Not less exciting, but differently exciting. Instead of the anxious butterflies I'd always associated with new relationships, I felt calm, grounded, safe. At first, this worried me. I'd been conditioned to believe that intense feelings meant real love, that drama meant passion. The calmness I felt with James made me wonder if I was settling, if this was just another comfortable but not right situation like I'd had with David. But Dr. Mitchell helped me understand the difference. Anxiety and excitement feel similar in your body, she explained. You've learned to associate that anxious feeling with love, but what you're feeling with James, that calm, grounded feeling, that's actually security. That's what healthy attachment feels like. It's unfamiliar because you've never experienced it before. She was right. As the relationship developed, I started to notice all the ways it was different from my previous patterns. With Brandon, I'd felt like I was constantly proving my worth, earning his attention and affection. With James, I felt accepted as I was. With David, I'd molded myself to fit his life. With James, we each maintained our own identities and interests while building something together. In all my previous relationships, I'd felt like I was performing a version of myself that I thought they wanted. With James, I could be fully myself, messy, imperfect, honest, and still feel loved. In past relationships, conflicts had felt threatening, like they might end everything. With James, we could disagree and work through things without it feeling like the relationship was in jeopardy. Most importantly, I liked who I was in the relationship. I wasn't shrinking or hiding parts of myself. I wasn't sacrificing my needs or goals. I was growing, flourishing, becoming more fully myself. That's when I understood what healthy love actually looks like. Not the romanticized version from movies, but the real, lived-in version. If I could go back to my younger self, I would tell her what to look for in a healthy relationship. Look for someone who is curious about you, who asks questions, who genuinely wants to understand your thoughts and feelings and experiences, not someone who just waits for their turn to talk. Look for consistency over intensity. Grand gestures are nice, but small, daily acts of consideration matter more. Does he remember what you said was important to you? Does he follow through on his commitments? Does he show up reliably? Look for someone who respects your boundaries, who doesn't pressure you to move faster than you're comfortable with, who accepts no without sulking or punishing you, who encourages you to maintain your friendships and interests outside the relationship. Look for someone who can handle conflict maturely, who doesn't resort to yelling, name-calling, silent treatment, or manipulation when they're upset, who can express their needs clearly and listen to yours, who sees disagreements as problems to solve together rather than battles to win. Look for someone who supports your growth rather than feeling threatened by it, who celebrates your successes, who encourages your ambitions, who wants you to be the fullest, best version of yourself even if that means you're sometimes busy or challenged. Look for someone whose presence in your life makes it richer, not smaller. Are you seeing your friends less, pursuing your interests less, feeling less like yourself? Those are warning signs, not evidence of deep love. Most importantly, look at how you feel in the relationship. Do you feel safe to be yourself? Do you feel valued? Do you feel like an equal partner? Do you like who you are when you're with them? These might sound like basic requirements, but I spent 15 years in relationships that didn't meet them because I didn't know I was allowed to have standards. I thought being chosen was enough. I thought having a relationship, any relationship, was better than being alone. Now I know that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who makes you feel small. That an imperfect relationship with the right person is better than a perfect performance with the wrong one. That healthy love shouldn't require you to sacrifice who you are. James and I have been together for 6 years now. We got married when I was 39. It's not perfect, no relationship is, but it's healthy. It's real. It's built on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than fear or neediness. But I'll be honest, even in a healthy relationship, I've had to unlearn old patterns. Even now, at 42, I sometimes catch myself falling into old habits. Sometimes I still want to say yes when I mean no, to avoid conflict at all costs, to take responsibility for his emotions. Sometimes I still feel that old panic that if I'm too much myself, if I express too many needs, if I'm not accommodating enough, he'll leave. The difference now is that I recognize these patterns when they show up. I can catch myself and choose differently. And I have a partner who sees it too, who gently calls me out when I'm shrinking or people-pleasing, who reminds me that he wants the real me, not a performed version. If I could go back to my younger self, there are some hard truths I would tell her. Things that would have been painful to hear but necessary to know. First, you can't change people. You can't love them into being who you need them to be. You can't fix them, save them, or convince them to value you if they don't. The only person you can change is yourself. Second, you teach people how to treat you. If you accept bad behavior, it will continue. If you don't enforce your boundaries, they will be crossed. This isn't about being difficult, it's about having self-respect. Third, love is not enough. Love doesn't fix fundamental incompatibilities. Love doesn't overcome deep differences in values. Love doesn't compensate for lack of respect, poor communication, or toxic behavior. You need love and compatibility and mutual respect and healthy communication. Fourth, your feelings are not always accurate. Sometimes what feels like love is actually trauma bonding. Sometimes what feels like passion is actually anxiety. Sometimes what feels like commitment is actually codependency. Learn to distinguish between feelings and reality. Fifth, being alone is not a tragedy. Being in the wrong relationship is. Don't stay in something bad because you're afraid of being single. Being single is an opportunity, not a sentence. Sixth, you cannot make someone love you the way you need to be loved. Some people are not capable of healthy relationships, not because of anything you did or didn't do, but because of their own wounds and limitations. That's not your fault, and it's not your job to fix. Seventh, red flags in the beginning don't go away. They get worse. If something feels off in the first few months when everyone is on their best behavior, it will definitely be a problem later. Trust your instincts. Eighth, chemistry isn't compatibility. Sexual attraction isn't emotional connection. Intensity isn't intimacy. Learn the difference. Ninth, you deserve to have standards. You deserve to be selective. You deserve to wait for someone who truly fits your life rather than accepting whoever shows interest. And finally, the hardest one. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is leave. Love yourself enough to walk away from relationships that aren't right, even if they're not overtly terrible. Love yourself enough to choose your own well-being over the comfort of familiarity. Love yourself enough to believe you deserve better, even when you're scared you won't find it. I'm 42 now, and here's what I know about love that I wish I'd known at 25. Love, real, healthy love, is not about losing yourself in another person. It's about two whole people choosing to walk through life together while maintaining their individual identities. Love is not about constant drama and passion. It's about steady, consistent care and commitment. It's about choosing each other again and again, especially on the days when it's not easy. Love is not about finding someone who completes you. It's about being complete on your own and finding someone who complements you. Love is not about sacrificing your dreams, your friends, your identity. It's about finding someone whose dreams align with yours, who loves your friends because they love you, who wants you to be fully yourself. Love is not about ignoring red flags and hoping things will change. It's about paying attention to how someone treats you from the beginning and believing them when they show you who they are. Love is not about winning or losing, about who cares less, about playing games. It's about being vulnerable and honest and trusting that the right person will meet you there. Love is not about fixing someone else's wounds or expecting them to fix yours. It's about two people doing their own healing work and supporting each other through it. Love does not require suffering. It should not feel like a constant battle. It should not make you smaller, sadder, more anxious, or less yourself. Real love should feel like coming home, like you can finally exhale, like you don't have to pretend or perform, like you're seen and valued for exactly who you are. Real love should expand your life, not shrink it, should encourage your growth, not stunt it, should make you more yourself, not less. Real love should feel secure, not anxious, peaceful, not chaotic, grounding, not destabilizing. If I could sit down with my 25-year-old self, the one who thought love meant jealousy and drama and sacrifice, I would tell her all of this. I would tell her that the relationships she thinks are love are actually lessons, that the heartbreak she thinks is destroying her is actually teaching her what she truly needs. I would tell her that she has to learn to love herself first, to build a life she's proud of on her own, to develop a strong sense of self that can't be eroded by someone else's approval or disapproval. I would tell her that being single is not a failure, that it's infinitely better than being in the wrong relationship, that it's an opportunity to become the kind of person who attracts healthy love rather than repeating toxic patterns. I would tell her to pay attention to how people treat her, not just how they make her feel. That consistent kindness matters more than grand gestures. That respect and compatibility matter more than chemistry. I would tell her that she doesn't have to settle, that she's allowed to have standards, that waiting for the right person is worth it. Most of all, I would tell her, you are enough. You don't need someone else to complete you. You don't need a relationship to prove your worth. You are inherently valuable exactly as you are. And when you truly believe that, when you truly live from that place, the right kind of love will find you. Not because you need it, but because you're ready for it. I can't go back and tell my younger self these things. I can't spare her the heartbreak, the wasted years, the painful lessons learned through trial and error. But maybe by sharing my story, I can tell your younger self. Or maybe your current self, if you're in the middle of figuring all this out like I was. Here's what I want you to know. However old you are, it's not too late. It's not too late to start doing the work on yourself. It's not too late to leave a relationship that's not right. It's not too late to raise your standards. It's not too late to choose differently. I spent my 20s and early 30s in relationships that taught me what love isn't. I spent my mid-30s learning to love myself. I found healthy love in my late 30s. Everyone's timeline is different, and that's okay. What matters is that you start where you are, that you get honest with yourself about your patterns, that you do the work to understand why you choose what you choose and believe what you believe about love. What matters is that you stop accepting crumbs and start believing you deserve the whole meal, that you stop making excuses for bad behavior and start recognizing it for what it is, that you stop shrinking yourself and start showing up fully. What matters is that you learn the difference between loneliness and aloneness, between chemistry and compatibility, between intensity and intimacy, between love and codependency. And most of all, what matters is that you love yourself first. Not in a narcissistic way, but in a healthy, grounded way. That you build a life you're proud of on your own. That you become whole before you try to merge with someone else. Because here's the truth I wish I'd known earlier. The right person won't ask you to be less than you are. They'll inspire you to be more. They won't make you feel anxious and uncertain. They'll make you feel secure and valued. They won't drain your energy. They'll replenish it. And you won't find that person by searching desperately or by settling for whoever wants you. You'll find them by being yourself, living your life, knowing your worth, and recognizing them when they show up. because you'll finally know what healthy love looks like. So, what would you tell your younger self about love? What lessons did you have to learn the hard way? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments.